And we will be presenting you the 2018 novice debate on the topic, Civil Disobedience in a Democracy is Morally Justified. So first I'll be reading the affirmative constructive, where I will offer my argument for why I think that civil disobedience is morally justified in a democracy.
For your hair. Okay.
6 minutes starts now. I affirm the resolution, civil disobedience in a democracy is morally justified. For clarification of the round, I will offer the following definitions for the terms civil disobedience, democracy, and morally justified. Civil disobedience, the intentional, non-violent breaking of laws in order to broadcast an injustice to society. These acts are performed to denounce the current laws as oppressive, and the person participating in civil disobedience is willing to accept consequences in order to abide by the essential processes of a democratic society. Democracy, a system of government in which all citizens have a say, directly or indirectly, in choosing their laws and government officials. In a democracy, the citizens are regarded as equal and have the freedom to express their own beliefs. Morally justified, to adhere to accepted standards of human conduct. These standards are based according to one's individual conscience. When an action is morally justified, its benefits outweigh its harms. The resolution deals with utilizing civil disobedience to ensure that everyone's voice is heard in a democracy. Civil disobedience is used to change laws that conflict with the equality of citizens. Because both the act of civil disobedience and the motive for civil disobedience are preserving everyone's rights, my value is equality. Equality requires ensuring that everyone's rights are respected, so my criterion is combating oppression. Contention 1. Civil disobedience is the most effective way to obtain positive publicity. Violent protests create negative publicity, and peaceful protests don't create enough publicity, but civil disobedience is the happy medium between these two ineffective forms of protest. Quote, colorful demonstrations and weekend marches are vital, but alone are not powerful enough to stop wars. Wars will be stopped only when soldiers refuse to fight, when workers refuse to load weapons onto ships and aircrafts, when people boycott the economic outposts of empire that are strung across the globe, as Arundhati Roy stated. By publicly accepting punishment for their acts of protests, civil disobeyers appear simultaneously courageous and respectful to the government. Witnessing civil disobedience begs questions about the protesters' motives and thus encourages citizens to become more knowledgeable about the injustices at hand. Then, they are more likely to change their opinions and concur with the protesters' ideas. Marking the beginning of the civil rights movement, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus to a white person in 1955. She defied the command of the bus driver and she broke the law. After being arrested, fired from her job, and receiving death threats for her act of civil disobedience, the publicity of this flawed set of governmental paradigms started to change the public opinion. Seeing Parks' brave act of civil disobedience, many members of the black community congregated and created the Montgomery bus boycott. Because of the continued resistance of Jim Crow through civil disobedience, the civil suit Browder v. Yale became a victory as the Supreme Court ruled segregation of buses to be unconstitutional. Often, civil disobedience is needed in order to challenge laws in a democratic system. While my opponent may argue that an alternative to civil disobedience is taking the issue through the court system, breaking the law is required before one can establish standing needed to challenge the law in a court. Once a citizen has accepted consequence for a breach of the law, only then can the morality of the law be questioned through the courts. These arguments prove both my value and my criterion by preventing oppression to achieve equality. Contention 2. Civil disobedience prevents oppression. Subpoint A. It reinforces the social contract between government and citizen. According to John Locke, the government and its citizens have a mutual contract in which the government agrees to protect its people, and the people agree to accept the laws voted in by the majority. Marion Williamson states that the primary social contract between the people of the U.S. and their government is that ours is to be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. When a government creates oppressive laws, they break their side of the contract. To ensure that the government is preserved, the citizens must use civil disobedience as leverage to correct the government. As Henry Thoreau said, disobedience is the true foundation of liberty. The obedient must be slaves. During the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King Jr. staged illegal sit-ins to denounce and call public attention to the discriminatory Jim Crow laws limiting the rights of African Americans. The injustice of these laws was brought up to the surface after the arrest of many demonstrators. After the citizens broke the law, the government was forced to amend their practices to reestablish the social contract between government and citizen. Because civil disobedience ensures that citizens are not oppressed by governmental laws, these acts accomplish my value of equality by guaranteeing a level playing field between the government and the people. Civil disobedience acts as a check for the social contract, reinforcing the accountability of the government to its people and the people to their government. Subpoint B. Civil disobedience protects minorities from oppression from the majority and ensures that the minority has an equal voice. In the words of Ayn Rand, individual rights are not subject to a public vote. The majority has no right to vote away the rights of minority. Because the majority has the power to vote away the rights of the minority, the minority's vote alone cannot prevent oppression from the majority, who will inundate the minority's voice with their strength. Due to media bias towards the majority, the circulation of the minority's ideals is minimized and dwarfed by the circulation of popular belief. Civil disobedience is a utensil to create level ground on which the minority can unveil to the public previously hidden injustices. In many cases, the majority is comprised of many apathetic or indifferent citizens who simply follow others' votes but do not have a strong opinion either way. The vote doesn't take into account the degree of one's opinions. While this is an inherent flaw in democracy, civil disobedience works to correct this flaw by allowing citizens to fully show the degree of their preference. Peter Singer furthers, it has long been recognized that there is a danger of injustice in democracy because the democratic system takes no account of the intensity with which views are held, so that a majority which does not care very much about an issue cannot vote a minority for which the issue is of vital concern. By civil disobedience, the minority can represent the intensity of its feelings to the majority. I have proved the necessity and effectiveness of civil disobedience in a democracy, accomplishing the value of equality by strengthening the minority and the criterion of preventing oppressive laws and oppression of minorities. For these reasons, I urge an affirmative ballot, and I now stand ready for cross-examination. Thank you.
Okay, that was just a 6-minute affirmative constructive. So now we're going to begin the 3-minute cross-sex, where essentially it's me asking questions to me as the negative speaker, asking questions to the affirmative speaker for 3 minutes. And essentially what I'll be doing is try to pinpoint flaws in his case and try to reveal blaring things to the judge that may be off or maybe good strategically later in the round.
And the other thing this time can be used for is to clarify anything that you might have missed during your opponent's delivery of their constructive. So you don't want to spend too much of this time doing that, but it's always good if you didn't catch their value or value criterion or one of their contention taglines, to just go ahead and clarify that at the beginning of the process.
Okay.
So with that, I guess we'll begin.
Okay, so just to clarify, what's your contention 2 tagline?
My contention 2 tagline? Yeah, so my tagline was that civil disobedience prevents oppression, and it does so in 2 main ways. Did you need my 2 subpoint taglines?
Just the first one.
Okay, yeah, so my subpoint A is that it reinforces the social contract between government and citizen, and that's how it accomplishes the goal of preventing oppression.
Okay, so my first question starts off on your contention 1 about publicity. So is civil disobedience is the best way that you're advocating for, correct?
Yeah.
So if you're okay with just us breaking laws and however we choose?
No, so civil disobedience by definition is an act that's employed in order to achieve a specific political purpose. So for example, murdering someone would not be an example of civil disobedience.
We agree on that, but essentially I can pick and choose whatever non-violent law to break, under civil disobedience, correct?
I'd say that at the point that it's civil disobedience, you're doing it in order for the purpose of breaking that law. And the point is that civil disobedience, because it entails legal consequences, it means that people who employ civil disobedience are trying to achieve positive publicity because they're willing to accept the consequences for their actions. Okay,
so you list one example in your case. You list mainly the civil rights movement. Are there can you state that can you quantify that there are there are more successful stories of civil disobedience used to achieve good actions as opposed to negative ones?
Can I quantify it? No.
Or can you because you list one example, but explain how that one example proves that the entire process of civil disobedience is okay.
No, so my argument was that intrinsic to the process of civil disobedience is that the publicity that results, it causes people to question, oh, that person really went to jail for that cause, and that causes an internal mindset where you have to question why they might have taken that action, and that's one thing that causes people to rally behind, because it's very inspiring when someone is willing to accept consequences and willing to break the law in terms of a greater goal. And there are many other examples throughout history, but I'm not going to quantify how many of those were actually successful.
Can you agree that through nonviolent protests we can still achieve publicity?
Not to the same extent, right?
Okay, but we can achieve it without breaking the law, correct?
No, not to the same extent. I'm saying there's certain aspects of civil disobedience that are uniquely key to promoting these same goals.
You listed your Rosa Parks examples of like negative consequences to the specific person. Like, is that fine, or should we like actually?
Well, it's the person's decision. Like, I'm saying that like they're justified in doing it. I'm not saying people have to civil disobey in a democracy, but I'm saying that if they make the choice to do that, that's something that's
so regarding your contention 3, you talk about leveling the playing field. So like, are there other ways to do this?
No. So the laws are voted in by the majority by definition, and in order to combat this, we need a minority that has the ability to express the degree to which.
Okay, wouldn't this only be furthering like oppression of minorities, since we're like jailing them and we're putting them in like place, or we're like forcing them to like actually.
No, that's not a problem with civil disobedience. The problem is with the law that makes them go to jail. Civil disobedience exposes the fact that it's unjust that they have to go to jail in order to do something that the public would see as otherwise being just.
Okay, that's 3 minutes. Okay, so now I'm gonna be giving the first neg speech. So essentially, that's me giving my constructive, and then responding to my opponent's arguments. Usually, it's the speech is 7 minutes, and usually you'll spend 3 minutes or 3 or 4 minutes on your own case, and then the other time on your opponent's case. Okay. So my case, opponent's case. I'll begin. Janet Renaud once said, "The keystone to justice is the belief that the legal system treats all fairly." It's because I agree with Janet Renaud that I negate the following resolution. Since the resolution questions whether civil disobedience in a democracy is morally justified, my value is governmental legitimacy. As the government is ultimately the actor in the resolution, my value criterion is equality. In a democracy, only when governmental legitimacy is upheld can equality be achieved. Contention 1. The justice system is the most effective means to guarantee equality. The justice system is the single way to guarantee equality. There is no other method in which the rights of a person or a group can be more protected than under the law. In this way, the constituents of a nation should utilize the justice system to guarantee their equality. Brown versus Board of Education is a clear-cut example of how the law has superseded any civil disobedience and guaranteed the equality of schooling for children. Brown versus Board of Education was a groundbreaking legal action that brought about the desegregation of the school system. The school system previously operated under the doctrine of separate but equal. However, the equality between the white and colored schools was never nearly upheld, despite continuous protests. Colored schools were nearly always funded much poorly than the white schools and lacked the resources to comfortably and effectively teach its students. Therefore, the colored population was receiving a severely subpar education in comparison to the white population. This injustice in society was ratified by the verdict of the justice system. The justice system succeeded in spite of civil disobedience. Contention 2. Civil disobedience is ineffective. Civil disobedience is an ineffective practice. When encountering injustice, it is not necessary to engage in civil disobedience to bring law into court. One would not need to break the law or be arrested for an individual to bring an issue to court. As long as one can prove that an injustice is occurring, one would be able to sue. In addition, engaging in civil disobedience to bring about awareness is ineffective and without point. The practice of bringing about awareness has no effect on the outcome of the court case. In addition, civil disobedience is too brash of an action. While the cause may be a noble one, it is the wrong method to go about bringing change and ultimately deters people away from the cause. According to Wilson and Dulio in American Government Institutions and Policies, the demonstrators succeeded in getting civil rights on the national political agenda, but at a cost. Many whites opposed to the demonstrations, dug in their heels, and fought against many concessions to lawbreakers. In 1964 and again in 1968, over 2/3 of the whites interviewed in opinion polls said that the civil rights movement was pushing too fast, had hurt the black cause. As Wilson and Dulio showcase, the manner in which civil disobedience highlights an injustice is too brash and forthcoming. As showing 2/3 of the whites interviewed were turned away from the cause by manner in which the injustice was presented to them. Civil disobedience is too outright, and as it is too metaphorically and oftentimes literally shown in the face of others, it is not effective to try to place upon your idea onto another person, as this will often result in adverse reaction. It deters the majority away, stagnating process. The manner in which civil disobedience shows that injustice polarizes the issue. This makes any progress with the issue less likely. A prime example of this are the animal rights activists. For years, the animal rights activists have been campaigning for the betterment of treatment of animals. However, the nature of the process and civil disobedience, they have endangered and deterred the majority away for years. The issue of animal rights has stagnated and very little progress has been made. In this way, civil disobedience is counterintuitive and ineffective. On top of this, civil disobedience creates inequality in society. As a member of society, we all agree to obey laws. If people pick and choose which laws they can break, it creates an inherent inequality between those who obey the laws and those who break it. With all this, civil disobedience is a counterintuitive and ineffective method of changing public opinion and inciting change. Therefore, as civil disobedience does not uphold governmental legitimacy and does not result in inequality, I urge a negative ballot now. And now move on to my opponent's case. Regarding the value and value criterion, essentially both are important. We must look to both frameworks and are evaluating this round. On to contention 1 regarding public publicity. Cross-apply my contention 2 where I state that civil disobedience actually deters individuals away from the issue because you're shoving an issue into one's face. You're not actually offering them a peaceful quiet conversation between individuals. It's too upfront, it's too brash, and ultimately it deters people away. This is proven in my second contention. Essentially, this completely destroys his contention 1 of public publicity, because in the end, civil disobedience harms the issue and actually forces people away. Onto his contention, and regarding his civil rights movement, it's one example, and my opponent does not actually or analytically prove why in every single instance, or in the majority of instances, civil disobedience actually causes public publicity. Logically, you must side with the negative, because when you're forcing an issue to someone's face, it doesn't actually work, and it doesn't actually show them this is the problem. It just it points them to the injustice, them actually creating conflict in society as opposed to the actual injustice that occurs. Onto his contention 2 about preventing oppression. Against the subpoint A of the social contract, essentially individuals can just pick and choose whatever laws to break. In Cross-Ex, he said that all individuals are essentially allowed to break non-violent laws for whatever reason. This is inherently bad, because if civil disobedience is made out to be so positive, then all individuals would just be breaking laws, and this is very negative to the entire social the social contract with society. And individuals place their rights to the government, so they trust that the government will fix positive policy issues. We vote lawmakers, and we vote senators into law, and we ask them to and that process essentially through the democratic process should fix issues in society. And even through that, you can still email your senators, you can still do other things to result in positive policy action. You don't need to be breaking the law, which is too brash and too harmful to society. Now, regarding his subpoint B about minorities, this actually only furthers oppression of minorities, because this portrays minorities and portrays minority groups as outlaws and individuals who seeing themselves above the law. This is net bad to those groups, because if the society views individuals of or those minorities and those minorities of socioeconomic status as those who are breaking the law, this actually tarnishes their image, and it makes combating structural oppression and society far worse. Also, cross-apply my contention 1 where I essentially state that individuals or minority groups such as in the Black versus or Brown versus Board of Education, minority groups actually use the civil process as opposed to civil disobedience to cause positive policy action. Thus, I negate and stand ready for cross-examination.
Okay, so now we're gonna go. Okay, yeah. Now it's the affirmative cross-examination, where I will be asking questions about my opponent's case in order to basically the same goal that he was trying to accomplish in his cross-ex. Okay, so are you ready?
Yeah.
Perfect. 3 minutes starts now. So if a law is unfair, is it okay to break it?
I would say sure.
Okay, so if I
in the
prove
correct
that,
instance, because
okay.
If there are other if there's absolutely no other alternative, and that is the only choice that we can choose.
The only choice. Okay. But so obeying laws isn't necessarily good, is what you're saying. It depends on if the law itself is good.
Okay, but even still, we must not look to directly breaking that law. We must consider other alternatives first, because as
but why?
it's bad.
If the law is oppressive, why do I have to obey it in the first place?
Okay, well through the democratic process, we have a system of laws that govern our
why
society.
do I respect a law that says we should segregate black people?
Okay, you don't have to respect
okay,
the law.
so I can disobey it.
That doesn't mean
I can disobey
that doesn't
the
mean
law.
you can disobey it because
Wait,
that means
why? So,
you can
so you're saying there's intrinsic value to following that law even if it's racist?
Okay, no, there's intrinsic value to seeking to change that law, but you don't necessarily you still must follow the law because that's the system in our society.
Okay, I must follow the law that says that we should segregate people. That's
but
fine.
you can still strive to change it, and that's ultimately what you're trying to do.
So you use this example of Brown versus Board of Education, and you said, but wasn't this also because of civil disobedience and things that happened?
Ultimately that's.
So you say legal action is good, but what if I show that civil disobedience is a necessary first step in order to establish those legal actions?
You can make that argument, but ultimately in the end, it's it was through the legal process, which shows that and as the entire process of gaining rights and gaining the ability to have desegregated schools was getting public awareness to the issue. As you state, you can get public awareness through other ways, not just in civil disobedience, as I stated in my case.
Okay, but
and
if I prove that civil disobedience causes more publicity and makes it more likely for these issues to actually get into the court system, wouldn't that be sufficient to link into this contention?
Okay, no, but you still also have to combat the fact that going through the court is the only way of actually achieving the change. You can have years of civil disobedience because.
So in your contention, you say civil disobedience isn't necessary to bring things to court, but isn't it true that many times you have to get arrested in order to establish standing for which to
but
sue
you can
the
still
government?
result in changing the laws.
How do I go to court if I don't receive a punishment or I'm not, nothing is done to me against the government? Can I just sue the government and say that their laws are discriminatory, or do I have to first be arrested for disobeying that law?
The argument I make in my case is essentially that you have to, or you have other processes of actually going through change, and it doesn't necessarily mean you go through the court.
So
you
you just said that the court system is uniquely key, but how do I access the court system? If, as you just admitted, the only way to do that is through first establishing.
Okay, no, you can also.
How do I go to?
You can also go through.
How do I sue the government?
Okay,
tell me. Walk me through the process.
You can also go through methods of lawmakers and senators. You don't necessarily have to go through.
Okay, why can't we also do that in addition to these direct methods?
Just because it's a prerequisite doesn't mean that it's moral, and doesn't mean that it's moral in democracy. Just because you may have to break a law doesn't mean it's
So just because that's a prerequisite for meaningful legal change doesn't mean that it's necessary.
It's one prerequisite because you can go through other methods, as I stated before. You can talk to senators, and you can actually see policy making other methods.
Okay.
Well, you are so sassy.
So now I will be going over the first affirmative rebuttal, and this lasts 4 minutes, and in that time, as an off-time roadmap, I'll first be addressing my opponent's case and then defending my own case from attacks that he made in his previous speech. Do you mind? Can you hold for 4 minutes? Okay. Everyone ready? Okay. Time starts now. So in his first quote, he makes this assertion that the legal system treats people fairly, but that's the thesis of my case, is that the legal system has historically failed in many instances to protect people of color, minorities, and just people against due process of the law in the first place. Examples of this include the legal system before Brown versus Board of Education, or during slavery, and even right now in the present day through the prison industrial complex and people who are locked in jail and are forced and are discriminated because of their socioeconomic disadvantage because they can't pay the bail in order to get out. They're locked in jails without due process. And these are other problems that exist in the criminal justice system. He, in his last speech, agreed that if laws are not just, there's no reason to obey them, and that's sufficient to vote for the affirmative because that proves that there's no intrinsic value to the justice system and it's only good insofar as it accomplishes my value criterion of reducing oppression. So if I prove that a law is only good once it protects minority groups and once it reduces oppression, there's no reason to blindly follow this law. He says, so his first contention focuses on how we need to go through the legal system, and in his last speech he said that this is the only method for which to actually create meaningful legal change. But as I've proven through my case, standing is actually a necessary component of going through the legal system. In order to sue the government, you can't just go up to them and change laws directly. You actually have to establish standing by disobeying the law and then suing the government in order to prove that an injustice occurred and that you can change the law through that. He says there are other methods other than civil disobedience, like emailing your senator. When's the last time that emailing your senator caused a meaningful legal change? That's my question. And even if that's not true, that's not mutually exclusive. We can achieve these benefits in tandem them with more meaningful alternatives like civil disobedience that accomplish similar goals. My point is that in order to change the system directly, we have to have these large landmark Supreme Court cases, which, like Brown versus Board of Education, which only occur once you have these meaningful protests. So then in his second contention, he addresses similar points about how it's not necessary, how civil disobedience isn't really necessary to bring things to court. But this isn't true because, as I've shown in my case, this concept of standing is necessary to sue the government in the first place. Then on his Duolio evidence, he asserts that the publicity is actually bad because many white people fought against it, but sure, white people are going to fight against the cause no matter if the law is broken or not. Like, people will fight against the cause if they disagree. It's not the fact that it's civil disobedience that's uniquely causing people to have this backlash effect. And furthermore, I'd say that any publicity for a previously unknown cause is something that's good, especially if it results in them going to jail, because it forces people to question their motives and achieves this benefit of having legal change. There are empirical examples, like for example the Vietnam War and the protesters who were marching on the Pentagon. This is what caused the change and the change in attitudes, in addition to the change in attitudes regarding the Vietnam War in the first place. So now briefly on my case, on my contention 1, his only response is that civil disobedience deters individuals because it means that people will be less likely to agree with the cause. But again, he's only had this one example of animal rights activists, but there are equally many examples like the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War, and these causes would not have had the same spark if it were not for these courageous individuals who agreed to disobey the law and suffer the consequences for something that they and society at large felt was unjust. Now to my contention 2, against my social contract, he says that it's bad to break nonviolent laws for no reason, but we're not breaking them for any reason. Again, in order to achieve civil disobedience, you actually have to be willing to suffer these consequences. And he's already agreed, which is so key in cross-ex, that if the law is bad and is worth civil disobeying in the first place, then there's no reason to obey it if it is unprotective. And that's how we achieve my value criterion of reducing oppression. Then on my B point, he says that it's bad because it tarnishes the minority's image, but it doesn't tarnish their image. They're accepting the consequence for their action and proving that something like segregation laws are not constitutional and are unjust to them. That never tarnished their image. It just achieves legislative change, which is what we're both trying to advocate for at the end of today's debate.
Okay, so I'll be giving the second negative speech. This is a 6-minute speech where I essentially will be going over rebuttals made in my last speech and what my opponent said against my case and what he said against my responses, and then I'll be giving voting issues to why the negative wins. These are strategic in the sense these show the judge hey, these are the main important rounds or main important points, and this is why my side has won. So the order I'll be giving it will be on the negative case, and then I'll move on to the affirmative case, and in the end, probably in the last minute or 30, I'll give voting. So let's begin. First, regarding the framework, we essentially agree to this. This is the same thing, and extend this across the flow. Regarding contention 1 of the justice system, he says that if the legal system has previously treated people unfair, but the problem is that society has treated people unfair, and going through the legal process actually changes this issue, and going through the courts and going through voting in lawmakers, voting in constituents, this actually changes policies, and that's actually benefits society. It's not that civil disobedience actually leads to fairity. There are multiple other alternatives, and we must actually look to those because those aren't negative. Now regarding his examples, he has shown that slavery, or he lists the examples of the system being unfair. He lists slavery and he lists the current prison industrial complex or process. But look to his slavery example, because slavery was solved through positive policy action, through meaningful change. All of this is and the current prison industrial process, these examples will only be solved through actual positive policy action and legal change, and these are the only ways and the best ways to actually resolve this. And he says this reoccurring thing that I conceded in cross-ex that if there's a bad law we must break it. But in cross-ex the entire point of saying that, or me making this point is that if a law is unjust, like you must go through the processes already allocated in the system, already existing in the system, rather than like breaking laws and like being a complete outlaw and being a negative member of society. You must go through current laws, and there, as I've shown before, through the legal process, through like contacting your senators and through like different methods, you can do this. And our system is made, our democracy is made so we can have legal methods of changing laws. Like that's the entire point of the United States, and like civil disobedience is not necessary. Now regarding this like argument where it's like it needs to be a prerequisite, but like as I've proven, one, it's not necessarily civil disobedience. There's other positive ways. Also, just because it may be one prerequisite doesn't mean that it's like morally justified, like in society. Like the argument like he makes that it's like a prerequisite, thus like we have to do this, but that's completely false, because just because it's like a prerequisite doesn't mean it's like justified morally. And I will prove like throughout the entire case, and I have, that like civil disobedience is actually like faulty. Now regarding my contention too, he never like directly responds to this, but he only like responds to how like I cross-apply it in like my app. So essentially like allow the animal rights like example to like extend across the flow, because he doesn't really like refute it, and like it's an example where like civil disobedience has failed to work. And there are many examples of how it failed to work, and you must like outweigh like these failures as opposed to like the positives that like my opponent may be cherry picking in his case. Now regarding the affirmative case, onto his contention one about publicity. So as I stated before, in my contention one, I cross-applied my entire contention two regarding in response to this contention. He says that essentially like civil disobedience will harm like in people's images and show like these are outlaws and actually deter people away from the issue. So like he just like states in response that like white people have always like opposed issue, but like that's not the point. Like it's not just like that white people oppose the issue, but you're like detracting like the society away from like the current issue, and you're actually harming like the entire like ideology of like the change and the ideology of like what they're trying to like incite like as positive policy action. And like any publicity, and he states that like any publicity is good, but that's not true. Bad publicity is worse than no publicity, because it detracts away from like future generations from actually like seeking change. Now regarding contention two, regarding the contention two about like preventing oppression, he states that like if a law is bad, and he keeps referring to this example where I quote unquote concede in cross-examination, but no, I essentially state that like we shouldn't actually break the law, because there are other methods, there are other alternatives, and you must weigh those across the flow, because those are legal and those are actually positive, and examples, as I've listed before, of it actually working. Look at Brown versus Board of Education, and also weigh that like civil disobedience can fail, and look at my animal rights example to prove that. Now, regarding subpoint B about minority, he says like they're like in the only response, and this is like an accepting consequences of an action. But no, judge, this is a very key important issue that my opponent weakly responded in his last speech. I say that like this actually tarnishes the image of minorities, because they are portrayed as outlaws and lawbreakers. This is very negative, because this actually like completely like continues and further structural oppression in society. This harms minorities, and this is a very important impact that my opponent weakly addresses. He says that like they're accepting consequences of an action, but the consequences are very negative, because like in the future these groups will be seen as like lawbreakers, and these groups in future like generations will be seen as like outlaws and like very negative people and like dangerous people, and thus this is very important, and this is a very key issue. Now on to voting issues. First, I have three voting issues. First, on the justice system, as I've proven in my case, it is one example, or it is the example of like multiple ways of like the legal process actually solving for issues. You can go through the court, you can go through senators, and you can go through like voting, and you can actually like email senators, you can talk to other people, you can go through multiple facets of like actually like seeking positive policy action, as opposed to like breaking the law aimlessly and like harmfully in like the affirmative world. The justice system is a voting issue because it shows that civil disobedience is not necessary, and if it's not necessary and there are better ways, it's not morally justified. Now and the second voting issue is on the contention 2 of ineffectiveness. So it's essentially very ineffective because, as I've shown before, it deters people away from the issue. When you're forcing something, and when you're forcing like individuals like something directly in their face, they're likely to like flinch and like go away and be intimidated by the issue and actually fall back. They won't actually completely understand the point. The awareness will not be on the issue, but it'll be on like the fact that they're breaking the law and the fact that like they're actually like not seeking positive policy action. Like if I'm like forcing a kid to eat broccoli, like they won't want to eat broccoli because I'm forcing them to. It's like very negative, and like it won't actually like, it deters people away, and this is negative, and this is bad publicity. your final voting issue is going to be on minorities, because this is very important and this is very key. Minorities will actually have their issue be completely tarnished, and this is very negative because like this furthers racism and this furthers like systematic oppression of groups. This furthers socioeconomic status because individuals will like see like these minorities as like lawbreakers and outlaws, and this is very negative. Thus, for these reasons, I urge a negative ballot.
Now we'll be going over the second affirmative rebuttal. So this is the final speech of the round, and it lasts for 3 minutes. And in it, I'm just going to be crystallizing, which means to offer like the points that the round kind of boils down into and the essential issues that I think are reasons to vote for my side. So, all right, 3 minutes starts. So now for my first voting issue, that's fairness. So we both, at the end of the day, we both value equality. So it's about achieving fairness, and my argument is that the practice of civil disobedience is not intrinsically unfair because people accept the consequences of their actions. When they disobey the law, they choose to go to jail. So it's not like it creates inequality between people who obey the law and people who don't, because they're still locked in jail. And furthermore, he's still agreed that there are certain laws in society that are bad, and if they're bad, for example, there's no reason to continue obeying them, which means that there's no intrinsic value to accepting the laws as they are, which leads me to my second voting issue, which is legal change. So in his last speech, he makes this argument that the legal system is key to address societal unfairness, but my argument is that the status quo legal systems are what create that unfairness, and that's why we have to go to the legal system to change that. He's conflating what's happening in society with what's happening in the legal system, but my argument is that those two things are one and the same. When something is wrong with the legal system and when minorities are oppressed, as he also agrees, we have to change the laws, and the only way to do that is to prove that these laws are unfair. He still conceded my point that in order to do this, in order to actually change the law directly through landmark cases, you have to disobey the law in order to establish standing. So I've won that the civil disobedience, these methods are prerequisites. In his last speech, he weakly argues that being a prerequisite doesn't mean that it's just. But if he's saying that legal change is necessary, and I'm arguing that civil disobedience is necessary to achieve that legal change, that therefore means that civil disobedience is necessary and therefore morally justified in democracy. That's sufficient to vote affirmative. Now to my third voting issue, that's publicity. So he makes these arguments that the methods of civil disobedience detract away from the cause, but it's not like it's not like he's proven that people who would otherwise be amicable to a cause are turned away. It's not like in the civil rights movement, white people were like indifferent and were like, oh, well, maybe equality for black people is good, but then Rosa Parks came along and disobeyed, and they were like, oh, she broke the law, and now I hate black people. That's not what happened at all. In fact, the publicity that resulted rallied more people, like especially people of color, to rally behind the cause and achieve more legal change, which then resulted in these things like Brown versus Board of Education. When they went to jail and they staged these sit-ins, this clogged up the courts and achieved legal change in order to like actually expose the problems that were occurring in society. Now my fourth voting issue is minorities, which links back to both of our arguments about reducing oppression. So while he's saying that the crux of his argument is that civil disobedience paints minorities as outlaws and people who are bad, and I'd say that like minorities are already viewed badly, which is why they're oppressed in the first place. But even if his argument is true that minorities are viewed badly, the legal change in the long term will outweigh this, because the legal system is actually what achieves like substantive rights for these minorities. So that's why you can vote affirmative, because even if these minorities will temporarily be viewed badly, when they actually are able to get access to these court systems and achieve legal change, it's better for them in the future. Because without civil disobedience, as I've proven, things like the Brown versus Board of Education, which my opponent says are so good, would never have happened in the first place. We can do the alternatives, but we also need this uniquely justified method of legislative change in order to achieve equality for all people. Thank you.